Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The wedding dress hung like a ghost in the moonlit chamber, its ivory silk mocking Lady Catherine Ashworth as she crept past it toward the window. Tomorrow, she was to marry Lord Edmund Blackwood, a union that would seal her father's political ambitions and her own doom. But tonight, with the manor house sleeping and the guards drunk on celebration wine, she had one last chance at freedom. Catherine's hands trembled as she secured the rope made from bedsheets to the window frame. Below, the rocky coast of Newport stretched into darkness, where the Atlantic Ocean crashed against the Rhode Island shores with relentless fury. Somewhere in those black waters lay her salvation, or her death. At this point, she welcomed either over the alternative. The wedding had been arranged not for love or even alliance, but for silence. Lord Blackwood knew about the documents hidden in her father's study, papers that could expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of colonial government. Men had died to keep those secrets buried, and Catherine had been foolish enough to believe she could use them to secure her freedom. Instead, she had painted a target on her back. "Once you're his wife," her father had said with cold finality, "your testimony will be worthless in any court. A wife cannot testify against her husband's interests." The irony was bitter as ocean spray. The very laws meant to protect women had become the chains that bound her. Catherine gathered her dark cloak and the small leather satchel containing her few precious possessions, including the copies of those damning documents. If she could reach Boston, perhaps find passage to the Caribbean, she might survive long enough to expose the truth. It was a desperate plan, but desperation had become her closest companion. The climb down the manor's stone walls proved treacherous, her soft hands quickly bloodied by the rough rope. When she finally dropped to the ground, her legs nearly buckled from exhaustion and fear. Behind her, Ashworth Manor loomed like a prison she had barely escaped, its windows dark except for the single candle burning in her father's study where he no doubt planned her future with cold calculation. The path to the harbor wound through dense woods that seemed to whisper with hidden dangers. Every snapping twig made her heart race. Every owl's call sounded like pursuit. She had perhaps 6 hours before her absence would be discovered. 6 hours to find a ship willing to take a desperate woman with limited coin and unlimited enemies. Newport Harbor smelled of salt, tar, and unwashed humanity. Even at this late hour, the docks remained active with sailors, merchants, and those who preferred to conduct their business under cover of darkness. Catherine pulled her hood low and moved through the shadows, studying each vessel with growing desperation. Most of the ships were honest merchants or fishing boats, vessels that would demand papers she didn't possess and ask questions she couldn't answer. What she needed was a ship whose captain cared more about gold than law, more about profit than propriety. That's when she saw the Raven's Wing. The ship sat apart from the others, her black hull gleaming in the moonlight like polished obsidian. She was built for speed rather than cargo, her lines sleek and predatory. No flags flew from her masts, and the men working her deck moved with the quiet efficiency of those who valued stealth over legitimacy. As Catherine approached, a voice called out from the shadows, "That's far enough, miss." She froze as a man stepped into view, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair tied back and eyes that reflected the harbor lights like chips of amber. His clothes marked him as a sailor, but the pistol at his hip and the confident way he carried himself suggested he was no common seaman. "I need passage," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her racing heart. "Do you now?" He studied her with unsettling intensity, taking in her fine cloak and the nervous way she clutched her satchel. "And what makes you think we're in the passenger business?" "Because honest ships don't work by moonlight and desperate people don't ask questions about destinations." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Fair enough. I'm Captain Marcus Drake, and that's my ship. Question is, what's a lady like you running from that's bad enough to risk boarding a vessel like mine?" Catherine hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but neither was continued deception. "Marriage to a man who wants me dead once I've served his purposes." Drake's expression sharpened. "Political troubles?" "The deadliest kind." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine interest. "What can you offer in payment? And don't insult me with promises of reward from grateful relatives. I've heard that song before." Catherine reached into her satchel and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, moonlight caught the surface of an ornate golden compass, its face inlaid with precious stones that sparkled like captured stars. Drake's breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "It belonged to Captain Henry Morgan. My grandfather took it as prize when Morgan's fleet was destroyed off Jamaica." She paused, watching his reaction. "I'm told it's worth a small fortune to the right buyer." "More than a fortune," Drake whispered, reaching out to touch the compass with reverent fingers. "This is the compass of the winds. Morgan claimed it could find any treasure, lead any ship to safe harbor. Pirates have killed for less than this. Then it should buy me passage to wherever you're bound." Drake looked up from the compass to study her face again. "This compass is legendary among those who sail beyond the law." "Why would a nobleman's daughter possess such a thing?" "Because my family has its own secrets, Captain. The question is whether you are willing to protect mine in exchange for something that could make you the most successful pirate in these waters." The word pirate hung between them like a challenge. Drake had been careful not to openly admit his profession, but Catherine's boldness forced his hand. "Pirate, is it?" He smiled, but there was steel beneath the humor. "That's a dangerous accusation to make without proof. The proof is in how you recognize that compass and what it means. The proof is in the way your crew works without lights, and your ship bears no colors." Catherine stepped closer, her green eyes fierce with determination. "I need a protector who lives outside the law, Captain Drake, and you need what I'm offering. The question is whether we can trust each other long enough to make this arrangement work." Footsteps echoed from the direction of the town, and both Catherine and Drake turned toward the sound. In the distance, torches bobbed like angry fireflies as searchers began to comb the harbor. "Seems like your absence has been discovered," Drake observed, his hand moving unconsciously to his pistol. "Then we need to leave. Now." Drake studied her face one more time, seeing the desperation she could no longer hide, and the intelligence that had brought her this far. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decision. "Welcome aboard the Raven's Wing, Lady Catherine. But understand this. Once you step onto my deck, you're no longer a nobleman's daughter. You're crew, and you'll live by our rules or not at all." As the torches drew closer and shouts began to echo across the water, Catherine placed the compass in Drake's hand and felt the cool metal seal her fate. Behind her lay the life she had known, the safety of walls and social conventions. Ahead lay the unknown dangers of the open sea and alliance with a man whose reputation was written in blood and salt water. But as Drake led her up the gangplank onto his ship, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they had to be better than the certain death that awaited her on land. The game was just beginning, and for the first time, she was choosing her own moves. The Raven's Wing slipped from Newport Harbor like a shadow fleeing dawn, her black sails catching the pre-morning wind as the coast of Rhode Island faded into gray mist. Catherine stood at the stern rail, watching the torches of her pursuers grow small, as pinpricks before disappearing entirely. For the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling the weight of invisible chains around her throat. "Regrets already?" Captain Drake's voice came from behind her, carrying a note of amusement that rankled her nerves. "Relief," she corrected, turning to face him. In the growing light of dawn, she could see him more clearly, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of years spent battling wind and wave. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his amber eyes held secrets as deep as the ocean itself. "Relief can be dangerous at sea," he said, leaning against the rail beside her. "Makes people careless, and careless people don't survive long in my world." "Your world?" Catherine studied his profile as he gazed out at the horizon. "Tell me, Captain, how does a man become an outlaw by choice rather than circumstance?" Drake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Same way a lady becomes a fugitive, I imagine. Someone with power decides you're inconvenient and suddenly the law becomes a weapon pointed at your heart." Before Catherine could respond, a shout from the crow's nest interrupted them. "Sail ho! 3 points off the starboard bow." Drake's demeanor changed instantly, all casual conversation forgotten. He pulled out a spyglass and trained it on the distant ship, his jaw tightening as he studied what he saw. "British naval frigate," he announced grimly. "HMS Intrepid, if I'm not mistaken. Captain Morrison commanding." "Do they suspect this ship?" Catherine asked, her heart beginning to race again. "They don't need to suspect. Morrison's been hunting me for 2 years, ever since I relieved him of a cargo of gold, bound for the royal treasury. Drake lowered the spyglass, his expression thoughtful. He'll give chase whether he recognizes us or not. Catherine watched the distant sail grow larger, her mind working quickly through the implications. Can we outrun them? In open water, yes. The Raven's wing is faster than any naval vessel afloat. Drake's smile held no warmth. But we're not in open water, are we? We're trapped between the coast and that frigate, with nowhere to run but south. Then we run south. Into waters where every harbor is watched, every port controlled by men who'd sell their mothers for the bounty on my head? Drake shook his head. That's not running, lady. That's a slow suicide. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's first mate appeared at Drake's elbow, a grizzled man with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. Captain, the wind's picking up. If we're going to make a run for it, now's the time. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Drake's gaze remained fixed on the approaching frigate. But I'm thinking we might try something different this time. Different how? Catherine asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Drake turned to face her fully, and she saw something dangerous kindle in his amber eyes. You said your family has secrets, Lady Catherine. Perhaps it's time to share one of them. I don't understand. That compass you gave me, it's not just valuable because of its history. It's valuable because it works. He pulled the golden instrument from his coat, its jeweled face catching the morning light. Morgan's compass of the winds doesn't just point north. It points toward what the holder most desires. And right now, what I most desire is a way out of this trap. Catherine stared at the compass, watching as its needle spun wildly before settling on a bearing that pointed neither north nor south, but directly west, toward the seemingly empty ocean. You can't be serious, it's just a legend. A story sailors tell too. Look at it, Drake interrupted, holding the compass steady. Look at how certain that needle is. There's something out there, something the Royal Navy charts don't show. Hawkins peered over Drake's shoulder at the compass, his weathered face creased with skepticism. Captain, with respect, we can't stake our lives on a sailor's tale. We're about to stake our lives on something anyway, Drake replied. I'd rather trust a legend than Captain Morrison's mercy. The sound of cannon fire echoed across the water, a warning shot from the approaching frigate. Catherine felt the ship shudder slightly as Drake shouted orders to his crew, adjusting their course to follow the compass's mysterious bearing. All hands prepare for pursuit, Drake called out. Mr. Hawkins, break out the storm canvas. If that compass is leading us into rough weather, I want to be ready. As the crew scrambled to obey, Catherine found herself caught between terror and fascination. The compass needle held steady on its western bearing, pointing toward what appeared to be empty ocean. Behind them, the British frigate was gaining ground, her superior size allowing her to catch more wind. Captain, she said quietly, if you're wrong about this, if I'm wrong, we'll be decorating the gibbet at Nassau by week's end. Drake's voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. But if you're right about that compass, if it really can find safe harbor for any ship? He didn't finish the thought, but Catherine understood. They were betting their lives on magic, on the slim chance that a pirate's legend might prove stronger than naval guns and royal justice. The chase continued for hours, the Raven's wing maintaining her lead through superior seamanship and intimate knowledge of wind and current. But slowly, inexorably, the frigate was closing the distance. Catherine could see individual figures on her deck now, could make out the gleam of brass cannons run out for battle. Then, as the sun reached its zenith, the impossible happened. Captain! The lookout's voice cracked with excitement. Land ho, dead ahead! Catherine rushed to the rail, straining her eyes against the glare of sun on water. At first she saw nothing, then gradually made out what appeared to be a low line of cliffs rising from the sea. But according to every chart she'd ever seen, there should be nothing but open ocean in this direction. It's not on any map, Hawkins breathed, his skepticism replaced by wonder. Drake raised his spyglass, studying the mysterious landmass. Hidden Cove, he announced after a long moment, protected by reefs that would tear the bottom out of anything with a deeper draft than ours. Behind them, the frigate had seen the land as well. Catherine could hear the distant sound of signal guns as the British captain tried to summon support that wasn't there. He can't follow us in, Drake continued, his voice rich with satisfaction. His ship draws too much water. He'll have to stand off and wait. Wait for what? Catherine asked. For us to come out. Or for reinforcements. Drake's smile was sharp as a cutlass. Lucky for us, that compass has shown us something no one else knows exists. We'll have time to rest, refit, and plan our next move. As the Raven's Wing navigated carefully through the treacherous reefs toward the hidden cove, Catherine felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The compass had saved them, but it had also proven that the world held mysteries she'd never imagined. "The secrets your family keeps," Drake said quietly, appearing beside her once again. "They're not just political, are they?" Catherine looked down at her hands, noting how they trembled slightly in the sea breeze. "My grandfather didn't just take that compass from Morgan as a prize. He was Morgan's quartermaster, his most trusted officer. When the Pirate King fell, grandfather disappeared with more than just gold. What else did he take? Knowledge, maps, the location of treasures that were never found." She met Drake's eyes, seeing her own desperation reflected there. "The compass is just the beginning, Captain. If you can keep me alive long enough to reach those treasures, I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. And if I can't?" Catherine looked back toward the frigate, now visible as a dark speck against the horizon. "Then we'll both hang as pirates and the secrets will die with us." As the ship glided into the hidden harbor, surrounded by cliffs that had sheltered pirates for generations, Catherine realized that her alliance with Marcus Drake had become something more complex than a simple arrangement for passage. They were bound together now by shared danger and mutual need, by the promise of treasure and the threat of the gallows. The game had indeed begun, but the rules were changing with every league they sailed from the world of law and civilization into the realm of legend and possibility. The hidden cove proved to be more than just a refuge. It was a pirate's paradise lost to time. Ancient stone structures, weathered by decades of storms, dotted the shore like the bones of a forgotten civilization. As the Raven's Wing anchored in the crystal-clear waters, Catherine marveled at the carved symbols on the cliff faces, recognizing some from her grandfather's journals. "Your ancestor chose his hiding place well," Drake observed, standing beside her as they prepared to go ashore. "This cove could shelter a dozen ships and still remain invisible from the sea." "He didn't choose it," Catherine replied, studying the ancient carvings. "He inherited it from the pirates who came before. This place is older than Morgan's legend." They rowed to shore in the ship's boat, leaving Hawkins to oversee repairs to the storm damage. The beach was white sand mixed with fragments of coral, and Catherine noticed pieces of pottery and metal scattered among the debris, remnants of ships and men long dead. Drake's boots crunched on the sand as he surveyed their surroundings with a practiced eye. "Fresh water spring," he noted, pointing to where a small stream emerged from the rocks. "Natural harbor, defensible position. A man could live like a king here." Some did. Catherine approached one of the stone structures, running her fingers over symbols carved deep into the weathered surface. "My grandfather's journal mentioned the Brotherhood of the Coast, pirates who shared this sanctuary for nearly a century. What happened to them? The same thing that happens to all pirates eventually. They grew old, died, or were hunted down by men like Captain Morrison." She paused at a larger carving, her breath catching. "But they left something behind." Drake moved closer, studying the symbols that had captured her attention. The carving showed a compass rose surrounded by intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the changing light. "It's a map," Catherine whispered, her excitement barely contained. Not to treasure, but to the other sanctuaries. The Brotherhood maintained a network of hidden harbors throughout the Caribbean. "How many?" "According to my grandfather's notes, 7 major havens and dozens of smaller caches." Catherine pulled a small, leather-bound journal from her satchel, one of the few possessions she'd brought from her old life. Each one marked with symbols like these, each one containing supplies, gold, and weapons for pirates in need. Drake's eyes widened as he understood the implications. "A fortune hidden across the Caribbean, and you have the only remaining guide to find it." "We have the guide," Catherine corrected. "I need your ship and your protection to reach these places. You need my knowledge to unlock their secrets." Before Drake could respond, a shout from the ship drew their attention. Hawkins was waving frantically from the deck, pointing toward the mouth of the cove. "Company," Drake muttered, reaching for his spyglass. Through the narrow opening they could see sails on the horizon, not the single frigate they'd escaped, but an entire squadron of British warships. Captain Morrison had called for reinforcements. "How long before they find the entrance?" Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They'll search every inlet and bay along this coast. Give them 2 days, maybe 3. Drake lowered the spyglass, his jaw set with grim determination. We need to be gone before then. Gone where? That's the entire Atlantic fleet out there. Drake turned to study the carved map again, his mind working quickly through their options. You said there were other sanctuaries. How far to the nearest one? Catherine consulted her grandfather's journal, cross-referencing the symbols on the stone with his notes. There's a cache marked as Storm's End about 60 miles southeast, but the passage is dangerous. Coral reefs and unpredictable currents. More dangerous than facing Morrison's entire fleet. Point taken. Catherine closed the journal, her decision made. We'll need the compass to navigate the reef safely. Then we'd better hope your grandfather's magic works twice. As they returned to the ship, Catherine found herself studying Drake's profile in the fading afternoon light. There was something different about him here, in this place touched by pirate legend. He moved with greater confidence, spoke with an authority that went beyond mere seamanship. You've been here before, she realized suddenly. Drake paused in his rowing, the oars cutting small whirlpools in the clear water. Not here specifically, but places like it. My father brought me to similar sanctuaries when I was a boy. Your father was a pirate? Captain Thomas Drake, called Red Tom, for the color of his hair and his temper. Drake's voice carried old pain and older pride. He died fighting Morrison's predecessor, trying to protect the last free port in these waters. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. Morrison killed your father. In a manner of speaking, the Navy hanged him after he surrendered under a flag of truce. Drake's knuckles whitened as he gripped the oars. Morrison was a lieutenant then, eager to make his reputation hunting pirates. He learned that honor means nothing when dealing with outlaws. So this is personal for you. Everything about this is personal. Drake's amber eyes met hers across the boat. The question is whether it's becoming personal for you too. Catherine considered the question as they reached the ship. 3 days ago, she had been Lady Catherine Ashworth, sheltered daughter of a colonial lord, her greatest concern the propriety of her embroidery stitches. Now she was a fugitive allied with pirates, reading ancient treasure maps and fleeing the Royal Navy. Yes, she said finally, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. It's becoming very personal. That evening, as the crew prepared the ship for departure, Catherine stood in Drake's cabin studying the compass by lamplight. The needle spun slowly, searching for direction, before settling on a bearing that would take them deeper into pirate legend. Storm's End, she murmured, reading from her grandfather's journal. A stronghold built into a hurricane-torn island, protected by reefs that shift with the tides and currents that change with the phases of the moon. Drake looked up from his charts. Sounds like the kind of place we can defend if necessary, or the kind of place that will kill us if we're not careful. Catherine met his gaze. Are you certain about this alliance, Captain? Because once we sail from here, there's no going back to the world we knew. The world I knew died with my father, Drake replied, and yours died the moment you climbed out that window. We're both outlaws now, Lady Catherine. The only question is whether we'll be successful ones. As the Raven's wing prepared to slip away under cover of darkness, Catherine realized that Drake was right. Her old life was gone forever, burned away like morning mist. What remained was this strange partnership with a pirate captain, this dangerous game of treasure and revenge that could end in riches or ruin. The compass needle held steady, pointing toward their destiny in the hurricane-haunted waters ahead. The island of Storm's End rose from the Caribbean waters like a fortress built by gods and scarred by hurricanes. Jagged cliffs towered above reefs that gleamed like broken teeth beneath the surface, while massive stone arches carved by centuries of storms created natural harbors invisible from the open sea. The Raven's wing approached cautiously, following the compass, bearing through waters that shifted from deep blue to treacherous shallow green without warning. There, Catherine breathed, pointing to a narrow opening between two towering rocks. The Hurricane Gate. My grandfather wrote that only ships blessed by fortune and guided by true knowledge could pass through safely. Drake studied the passage through his spyglass, noting how the current swirled and eddied around the submerged rocks. Blessed by fortune or cursed by pride? One mistake and we'll join all the other ships that thought they were clever enough to navigate these waters. Behind them, 3 days of pursuit had taken their toll. Captain Morrison's fleet had tracked them relentlessly, closing the distance with each passing hour. The Intrepid herself was now visible on the horizon, her signal flags demanding surrender from the ship that had twice escaped her guns. Captain, Hawkins called from the wheel. If we're going through, it has to be now. The tide's turning and those reefs will shift with it. Catherine consulted her grandfather's journal one final time, cross-referencing the compass bearing with the cryptic instructions written in faded ink. Hold steady on this heading until you see the twin guardians, 2 rock pillars that mark the deepest channel. Then follow the compass directly between them. And if the compass is wrong, then we die together, and Morrison can add our bones to the collection at the bottom of these reefs. Drake smiled grimly and gave the order. The Raven's wing slipped between the outer rocks like a shadow, her crew working in tense silence as they navigated the treacherous passage. Coral formations loomed on either side, beautiful and deadly, while the water beneath them changed color with each fathom of depth. The twin guardians appeared exactly as Catherine's grandfather had described, 2 massive stone pillars rising from the sea like monuments to forgotten gods. Between them the water ran deep and dark, creating a corridor barely wide enough for their ship. "Steady as she goes," Drake murmured, his hands tight on the wheel as they committed to the passage. The compass needle spun wildly for a moment, then locked onto a new bearing that led them through the pillars and into a hidden lagoon beyond. The sudden calm after the dangerous reefs was almost shocking. Clear blue water stretched before them, surrounded by towering cliffs that would hide their presence from any pursuing ships. But it was the sight ahead that took Catherine's breath away. Built into the cliff face like a palace carved from living rock was the sanctuary of Storm's End. Multiple levels connected by stone bridges and waterways, with docks that could accommodate a dozen ships. Gardens cascaded down the rock face in impossible defiance of the salt air, while structures that mixed human engineering with natural cave formations created a stronghold that seemed to grow from the island itself. "My God," Hawkins whispered. "It's real. It's all real." As they drew closer, Catherine could see that the sanctuary wasn't entirely abandoned. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and figures moved along the stone walkways. The Brotherhood of the Coast might be legend, but Storm's End still harbored those who lived beyond the reach of king and law. An elegant woman in her 50s awaited them at the main dock, her silver hair braided with shells and her clothes a mixture of fine silk and practical leather. She studied the approaching ship with eyes the color of storm clouds, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute command. "I am Captain Serafina Valdez, current keeper of Storm's End," she announced as Drake's crew secured their lines. "State your business in waters protected by treaties older than your grandfather's grandfather." Catherine stepped forward, her grandfather's journal clutched in her hands. "I am Catherine Ashworth, granddaughter of Quartermaster William Ashworth, who served under Henry Morgan. I come seeking sanctuary under the ancient codes." Serafina's expression shifted, surprise replacing suspicion. "William Ashworth. We thought his line had died out decades ago." She studied Catherine with new interest. "Do you carry proof of your heritage?" Catherine opened the journal, revealing not just her grandfather's notes but a folded piece of parchment bearing an elaborate seal. His letter of marque from the Brotherhood, signed by Morgan himself and countersigned by the keepers of all 7 sanctuaries. The older woman examined the document with reverent care, her fingers tracing the faded signatures. "This is genuine. You have legitimate claim to Brotherhood protection." She looked up at Drake. "But what of your companion? What claim does he make?" "Captain Marcus Drake," he said, stepping beside Catherine. "Son of Captain Thomas Drake, called Red Tom. I knew your father." Serafina's voice softened with memory. "A good man who died for principles the world no longer values. You have sanctuary here as well, Captain, though I suspect you've brought danger with you." As if summoned by her words, the sound of cannon fire echoed from beyond the Hurricane Gate. Morrison's fleet had found the entrance to the reefs and was testing their defenses with long-range artillery. "How many ships?" Serafina asked, her manner becoming businesslike. 5 ships of the line, maybe more," Drake replied, "led by Captain Morrison aboard HMS Intrepid. He's been hunting me for 2 years." "Morrison?" Serafina spat the name like a curse. "The man who broke the last treaty of parley. Very well. Storm's End has weathered royal navies before." She turned to address her people who had gathered at the sound of gunfire. "Prepare the harbor defenses. If Morrison wants to test the ancient protections, let him learn why this place has never fallen." What followed was like watching history come alive. Hidden gun emplacements revealed themselves along the cliff faces, their cannons trained on the narrow passages between the reefs. Ships emerged from concealed docks, sleek vessels designed for speed and maneuverability in the treacherous waters around the island. But it was the sight of Morrison's fleet attempting to navigate the Hurricane Gate that provided the most dramatic spectacle. The lead ship, trying to follow the Raven's Wing's path, struck a hidden reef with a grinding crash that could be heard across the water. As the tide shifted, two more vessels found themselves trapped between coral formations that seemed to move with malevolent intelligence. "The reefs are alive," Catherine whispered, watching in fascination as the coral seemed to shift and flow around the British ships. "Not alive," Serafina corrected with a knowing smile. "But they respond to those who understand their nature. Your grandfather's compass doesn't just point toward desire, it reads the harmony between ship and sea, finding paths that exist only for those the ocean accepts." As the sun set over Storm's End, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine stood with Drake on one of the stone terraces overlooking the lagoon. The British fleet had retreated beyond the outer reefs, their attempts to force the passage having cost them 2 ships and dozens of men. "We're safe," she said, though the words felt strange on her lips. "For the first time since this began, we're truly safe." "Are we?" Drake moved closer, his amber eyes reflecting the sunset. "Safety is a luxury people like us can't afford for long. Morrison will find another way to reach us, or send word to London for reinforcements. Then we don't stay." Catherine turned to face him, her heart racing at their proximity. "We use this place as our grandfathers intended, a base to recover the other treasures, to build something the Brotherhood would be proud of. And after that?" Catherine looked out over the lagoon, where the Raven's Wing floated like a promise of adventures yet to come. "After that, we write our own legend." Drake's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "A lady and a pirate captain. The ballad singers will have a field day with that story." "Let them sing," Catherine replied, feeling the last of her old fears fade away like morning mist. "We'll give them something worth singing about." As the stars emerged over Storm's End, Catherine realized that her flight from an arranged marriage had led her to something far more precious than freedom. In this place where legend lived and breathed, surrounded by the protection of ancient codes and the promise of treasures yet to be found, she had discovered not just sanctuary, but purpose. The game that had begun with desperation and convenience had transformed into something neither she nor Drake could have imagined. A partnership that challenged every convention of their time, a love that defied both law and propriety, and a future that stretched before them like an uncharted sea full of infinite possibility. The alliance between a lady in flight and an outlaw captain had become something far more dangerous and beautiful, a bond that could weather any storm, survive any pursuit, and create a legend that would outlast the very empires that sought to destroy them. At Storm's End, where hurricanes were born and fortunes made, their true adventure was just beginning.